afternoon, everyone. We have Ealdormere at home here, and we have a very unusual kind of episode here in which we're going to have a two-way interview between two people with the same name. Well, close enough. I'm Nicola.
And I'm Nicola.
And yeah, there's Nicola. And we thought it would be fun just to talk between the two of us about perspectives between somebody who's been in the SCA for 30 years, almost 30 years, that would be me, and somebody who's been in the SCA for a much shorter time. How long have you been in?
Since March.
Wow. So you joined like right in the middle of...
I got to go to Winter War, and that was it.
You've been to one event, yes. Okay, so that's good to know. So I thought the way we can do this is just to ask each other a few questions about our experiences in the SCA and how we got involved, what we're interested in, questions we have about how things work from the perspective of a newcomer and somebody who's much less experienced, much more experienced, I should say. And maybe I'll tell a story or two, and maybe you can tell a story or two based on your short experience, and brilliant insights will happen, hopefully, maybe.
Who knows? When you put two Nicolas together, something should happen.
Yeah. So maybe, why don't I tell you a little bit about how I got into the SCA, and then you can tell me the same thing. So 30 years ago, this time of the year, 30 years ago, I had just moved to Toronto for graduate school at the University of Toronto, and I didn't know anyone. And it was about a month and a half later, it was in early October, I was a graduate student. I was meeting some people in my graduate studies, but I didn't really have much of an outlet to do anything. I loved living in Toronto, but I didn't have an outlet for doing anything crafty or anything like that. I'd always been interested in making things, clothing, doing crafts and that sort of thing, and in history and how the two intersected. And so I happened upon the SCA in a demo at the U of T day on campus at the University of Toronto, and a couple really nice people talked to me and said, why don't you come to a meeting? And I thought, okay, that's cool. I don't know anyone. This would be a way to do something that wasn't school. And so I went to a meeting, and I've been in the SCA ever since. And I still remember at my first meeting seeing a really nice looking blonde guy, and I'm married to him. I've been married to him now for about 29 years. So we met.
That's so cute.
Yeah, that's Gunther. So we've been together since, and that's how I got involved, how I found out about the SCA and how I got to my first meeting. So how about you? How'd you hear?
I have a very different thing. You wouldn't know that I have a chronic pain condition, and this year I became in remission, which meant I could do sports again. I was way overexcited, but then I realized that sports and me don't get along very well. But then I realized sword fighting might. So I googled sword fighting in London, Ontario, which is a very interesting Google. And after browsing the internet, I came across a Reddit thread saying, maybe you should see the Society for Creative Anachronism. And I was like, what is that? Did a bit of more Googling, found out about sword fighting and heavy armored combat, and I got way too excited and went to a meeting that Wednesday. And it was odd because it was in a church. And I went down to this basement, and the first person I met asked me to call him Uncle Jay.
Oh, I know who you're talking about. Uncle Jay dates me.
He's great. And he basically got all excited, and he's like, you're new, this is great. So I met with him, and I spoke with him, and then I met Lord Berenger, the local marshal. And I basically sat there and went, oh my god, he's bringing armor. Oh my god, it looks so cool. Oh, I got very excited. And I went down and saw them fight for the first time and immediately knew it was for me. So I started with sword fighting. And then it grew from there, because as I found out, the SCA are my people.
It's awesome. I still remember the first thing martial I got into was actually rapier. And that was back when I joined, there was no rapier we were part of the Middle Kingdom at that point. There was no
Right.
rapier here. And there was a movement to get it started. And I had actually met up with some other people and was doing a little bit of sword play outside of the SCA in a separate group. And they were doing stuff with reproduction rapiers. And so I was super interested when I heard that it was going to come into the SCA. And so I got involved. And at that point, that meant you had to go to practices in Buffalo. And it was this
Oh my
really
goodness.
exciting time where this new thing was coming in. And so I think I was the second or the third, I think I was the third authorized rapier fighter in Ealdormere. And I did that for quite a few years before later in my grad school career, when I was focusing on finishing my degree, I got desperate for money and I sold all my gear. So
Oh.
I was also super busy at that point. And I figured by that time I was also doing archery, and I figured that archery, as far as the equipment, was a little bit cheaper. Once you got the basic equipment, you were good to go. And something had to go, and it was that. So unfortunately, I don't do rapier anymore, although I thought about starting again about 10 years ago. But once again, I was like, I have too many hobbies. I have way too many things in the SCA that I do. Um,
What a
and
problem.
yeah, so it's one of the problems, problems of the SCA, that there's this infinite list of things I want to do and try, and only so much time and so much money and things like that. So I've tried things over the years, and there's some things I don't do anymore, and other things that I didn't do when I first started that I found I absolutely love and wouldn't ever stop doing, like calligraphy and illumination. I started that like 7 years in, and I haven't stopped since, and I love it.
I did consider that. I'm an artist by trade, so I was just looking at all the pretty pictures and was like, ooh, art.
Oh,
Um,
you have loads of time, and you'll have loads of chances to get a chance to try anything you want to.
yeah.
And that's one of the neat things, is a lot of times you bring in skills to the SCA and you can turn them into something. And they may not be exactly what you did outside the SCA, but you can turn them um, into new skills for the SCA, which is really cool.
Yeah, I did that with armor. So apparently I'm a bit of an eager beaver, and not too many new people and not too many experienced people actually make their own helmets.
No, I remember I remember people posting things to that to
Uh,
your Facebook group. I'm like, wait a minute, I've never even heard of this person, and she's
this is
making a beautiful helmet.
yeah,
What?
no, I don't have it with me right now, but I am wonderfully excited because it passed inspection as well, with
Yay!
the stipulation that I add 2 or 3 more metal bars in a certain area. But it's very exciting, and I do 3D modeling and stuff like that, and I found the construction of the helmet incredibly similar to such things. I just sat there and I was like, well, all I gotta do is this, and I sort of pictured it, and someone said, okay, get a stump and carve out a hole and start shaping things. And then at Winter War, when I met Duchess Rylan, I was also introduced to Sir Edward, who has a wonderful armoring shop. And I got very excited because he has a tool called a throatless shear. And those things cut through plate steel like it's butter. It's lovely.
I think
But
that's one thing in general that I've learned about the SCA, is having the right tools makes life so much better.
yep.
If you don't have the right tools, you'll sit around and you'll flunk around, and then you discover the correct tool. I'm like, wait a minute, this was not actually that hard. I remember I learned to make nets, like netted, like for hair
Yeah.
nets. And when I first learned to make the nets, I was using, because you have to wind the thread up on something to weave it in and out and do that. And there are actual tools for this, but I didn't have the tools. So I used a cotter pin that you would use to like pin two pieces together.
Yeah.
And I wound the thread around it, and I used this, and I made my first net that way, and I learned the technique and things like that. And then I discovered that you could actually buy netting needles or netting shuttles that look almost identical to the ones that they found in archaeological finds. And I got one of those. I'm like, wait a minute, this is actually the right tool for this. This is so much easier now. And it was just an amazing thing. But it was kind of fun to play around and learn it the hard way, and maybe think about how somebody who didn't have the right tool would do it. But yeah, the right tools make all the difference.
I feel like that with my attempt at the first coat of plates. I failed miserably, and no picture shall ever grace the internet again of it. The second coat of plates, it's fine.
I'd like to tell you about my first piece of SCA garb.
Tell me.
Saw the light of day. I refer to it, when I joined the SCA, first of all, I now have a 13th century persona. I actually have two of them, and I'm kind of transitioning over to the Rus one, which is this garb. But when I started, I was a 5th century Ostrogoth. So the barbarians who invaded and came to Italy and set up a kingdom there, I was one of those. And I had a book that showed what some archaeological finds and stuff, what people wore. And it was what we would have referred to now in the SCA as a bog dress. So it was pinned up on the shoulders, and it was this tube of cloth pinned up on the shoulders. You would buy a couple of really, really cool decorative brooches, which of course I didn't have. I'm like, I like that. That doesn't look so hard. I have a little bit of sewing experience. I'm going to learn how to make that. So I went down to a fabric store, the dearly departed, what we used to call the Orange Bag store in Toronto, an enormous, wonderful fabric store that closed about a year and a half ago, I think. And I didn't know anything about fabrics. I knew what I liked, and what I liked was green and black shot synthetics taffeta.
Like no!
What dress out of. It was a really nice shade of green. And I bought some trim that was a really cool geometric trim. So I made this jumper kind of thing. It wasn't really a bog dress. I just kind of made like some straps and this tube jumper sort of thing. And I put the trim on it, and it was this green taffeta stuff. And it actually took me a couple of 3 months before I got to my first event. But by then I had already figured out that that was not the right fabric for this dress, and that this should never see the light of day. So I refer to it as the Ostrogothic prom dress. And I kind of wish I still had it, just to show people that, yeah, people all start out like not really knowing anything.
I was gonna say, you'd be ashamed if you had seen the inside of my gambeson. So the gambeson was my very first piece of fabric, and I wore around a gambeson during Winter War. It was that and my black dress pants. I was like, this is the closest thing I have. And but the outside looks lovely and quilted and normal, and as soon as you flip it inside out, the seams are everywhere, everything's unfinished, you see bits of fluff. It's just like, oh dear.
I do have my second piece of garb still, and from the front it looks pretty good. I got this amazing wide Indian trim, and so I was doing this sort of 10th century Venetian Byzantine kind of inspired look. So from the front it's awesome, and the fact that there's this huge trim on it makes it even awesome. It's purple and it's got this great trim on it. On the back, well, I knew that they didn't use zippers. I had to get the back closed somehow. I didn't know how to do grommets or anything like that, but I did know how to do hooks and eyes. So I got this hook and eye tape where it was actually loop tape. So I put this loop tape on the one side, and then I sewed individual hooks and eyes on the other side.
Oh my goodness.
So the entire back of this thing, which is like this long, is hook and eyes, and it's just nuts. Because I knew they didn't use zippers, but I had no clue what they did use.
I thought you were about to say, and you made individual fabric buttons for all of them.
No. I've got a picture of one of, I went to a specialty event later in my first year, like I've been in the SCA, I think about 6 or 7 months in. And I went to a private event that was based in Chaucer's, England. And again, the right thing to make would be what we call a cote hardie. Well, I didn't have a sewing machine that really did buttonholes, and so I my dress, it was amazing. It had buttons sewn on the front, but underneath it had Velcro.
Oh, see, in a previous life, that would be a excellent cosplay hack.
Yeah, that, it's like, I think I learned cosplay costuming
Just,
that way
yeah,
from the beginning. It's like we didn't do cosplay back then, but those were, yeah, the sort of things you would do for
yeah.
that.
This is my first official piece of garb, and I didn't even make it. Bless, a brand new Trinovantian made this for me at my request because I needed it for something, and um, and it's so lovely. And I was told it's based on a Viking pattern of some
Yeah.
sort. But all I did was I on the internet I picked out a pattern that looked good and relatively simple. And I'm like, I'm terrible at seams. Can someone else do this? I I traded her a bit of armor for it because I'm very good at moving metal and not fabric.
Yeah, I think you're going to find that there are more people who do fabric than do metal, so that's a really good, useful skill to have.
It's good. I
So
thought,
I've got a question for you.
all right.
Um, how did you come up with your name? I know how I came up with Nicola for me. I want to know how you came up with your name.
Well, I was looking at 12th and 13th century names, and possibly English. So I was given a lovely list by the Honorable Lord Dietrich, and he's like, here's a website, pick things. So I was looking around, and I had a list, and I basically sat there, and I had narrowed it down to 10 of them. And I sat there and I said them all out loud several times. And that was essentially how I picked Nicola. I was like, I like this. And then I did a little more digging into the name, and there was this lovely lady who defended her lands from invasion of some sort. And I was like, okay, it's sold. This is cool. I'm named after the cool lady.
And so am I. I am named after the same cool lady, Nicola
Yes.
de la Haye, who I subsequently read all kinds of things about her, and she's just an amazing lady. She did that one like she was an older lady, like
Yeah.
I'm saying like her 50s or 60s or 70s. And it was in 1217. It was the siege of Lincoln Castle, and the French were coming. It was right after King John had died, and Henry III was just this little kid, and they were trying to defend the country from the invading French. And she kicked butt, and it was awesome. Yeah.
I just
So,
loved, when I read it, I loved the story. I like hearing more about it there.
yeah.
It's a good thing that I chose a single A on the end instead of a double A, however, so that,
Yeah, mine
when someone's spelling
scribal
it.
error. They think that in manuscripts a lot of times, and I've looked at these, and this is true. A lot of times, if you're looking through a bunch of deeds and things like that, a clear indicator that a person is female is that there's an A on the end of the name.
Ah,
And there's some thought that they might have actually been using the male name Nicholas and giving it to women, but they're not sure. But they think that what might have happened is that they put an extra A on Nicola to say this is a female name, and so there were two A's together. So I may just be a scribal error.
admittedly, I also thought of Nikola Tesla when I saw the name and was like, I still like this. Not,
Yeah.
not exactly period appropriate, but
And it's funny because as I'm looking into transitioning into doing Rus, I've actually been researching medieval Russia, Rus, specifically Novgorod, since I think I've been doing it since about 1994. We did a specialty event, and I did all the research and learned about all the basics at that point. And being Nicola, I was like, okay, is there a Rus name that will be similar? And then I was like, okay, there's Nikolai, but the Russian names don't generally, most of them do not simply have feminine versions that you make by sticking an A on it or anything like that. So no, I couldn't be Nicola, although I love the name Nikolai. And so I kind of put that aside for a while. And when I came back to it, I'm like, okay, what name is closest enough to Nicola in Russian that I could use? And I ended up with first of all I tried Nicolina, and then I finally ended up with Nika, which is shorter. But it's funny because Nicola, just like you say, Nikola Tesla, that's Serbian. So it's Nikolai, it's the same name. But I'm always amused because even though my English name is spelled Nicolaa, Duchess Mary, or not Duchess, Countess Miriam, for some reason, whenever she gives me scribal assignments, she calls me Nicola, and she spells it Nikola, just like Tesla. And I don't know if that's because we go by that on the QEW all the time, Nikola Tesla Boulevard, and she sees that and she's like, okay, doing the Russian thing now, so that's kind of Slavic, and so it might work. So
That moment when you get the strange nickname, and then you're like, sure.
yeah. Well, if you go to what happened, I lived down in the mid realm for a few years after I finished my degree, moved back to Columbus, Ohio, where I'm originally from. I lived down there for, I guess it was 3 years before I moved back up here. And down there, the people see that name and they call you Nicola. And yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. And well, the other thing I always got, and you see that same dichotomy if you listen to those Ricola,
Oh no.
Nicola, and then Nicola, yeah. So people down there seem to instinctively call you Nicola, and it didn't help that there was in one of the neighboring groups there was another person with that name. She had an H in her name, so Nichola, and she used Nicola, and at least we had something that we could distinguish ourselves by. So she was Nicola and I was Nicola, but I never really got my US friends in Ohio to stop calling me Nicola.
Aren't you glad you're back in Ealdormere?
Yes, yes,
We're awesome up here.
yes,
That
we
was
are.
that was one of the things I was surprised about was that this was an international group, and I immediately pulled up the website and a map, and I'm like, wait, whoa, oh,
Yeah.
it's very international. It was very impressive.
Yeah, I have friends over in Drachenwald who get to go to events in castles and things like that, and I'm
Lucky.
jealous. But it's a little bit smaller over there because they have so many different reenactment groups of various sorts. But I've seen a friend of mine got laureled over there, and her ceremony was in this courtyard of this manor house, and it was so pretty. And I was like,
Sit there and be like, ooh, ooh,
I will
thanks.
say we used to for a while especially when I first moved back, we had a thing going with Casa Loma in Efferwick, that we got to use their stables for our fight practices, and then every February we used to do a demo for them. They would have their school kids and groups come through, and we'd staff the demo, and as an exchange we got to use Casa Loma for an event. So we got to
Nice.
have events in the castle, which was super cool. Actually, the stables were the most medieval feeling thing of the whole thing because they just were a little more rustic and they felt more like the actual Middle Ages, because the actual Casa Loma is full of like Victorian furniture, Edwardian, I think it is, Edwardian furniture and things like that. Still super cool. So I actually, when I got my Pelican, I got to have the ceremony at Casa Loma.
Oh, that's awesome.
Super amazing and super cool. But unfortunately, they turned over the management to an outside firm, and so we lost that deal because we couldn't use the kitchen anymore, and they kind
Oh.
of went a different direction with their demos. So unfortunately, we lost that ability. But it was really cool while it happened. I think it was 5 or 6 years we were able to do things at Casa Loma.
I'm a bit jealous. I did go see the Casa Loma stables at some point, and I'm a big nerd when it comes to all things horses because I used to be a horseback riding instructor.
Oh yeah,
So I was just like, oh, awesome. I did hear that some kingdoms have equestrian as well. I
yeah.
know that Ealdormere does not, but
It does not. They
I
do,
miss horses.
yeah, they do have people here who do it when they can. I mean, uh, Baroness Anne and Baron Alistair are down close. They live close to where I live, and they have horses.
Ooh.
And I think the hope is at some point that we might be able to get horse stuff going again up here. Duchess Adrielle is huge into the equestrian. So every time she goes down to like Gulf War, she makes sure to ride horses and she does stuff like that, but she doesn't have a horse.
I'm probably that person. I don't have the funds for a horse, but I sure do willingly muck stalls to be around horses. It's how it worked beforehand. I was like, ah, yes, I will
Yeah.
help teach and I will muck stalls, and then I get to pet things.
What are you looking forward to most in the SCA? I mean, since you've joined, what's your plans? What do you want to do?
Camping. I can't wait for COVID to be finished so that I can come camping with all of you. Because you all seem like so awesome people, and I adore camping in the first place, and I haven't gone in a very long time. And it just seems like a crazy cool event to go camping and fighting and things like that. But I'm also interested in making a whole lot more armor.
That's very cool. Yeah, the camping events are fun because it's like establishing a little, or in the case of Penzic, an enormous community over the space of a few days. And it's almost like having a little town, and you see all your friends, and it's actually one of the niftiest things is just seeing people's camp setups. You'll see everything. There has been a trend in the last couple, 3 years of people making Vardos, which are the little houses on wheels,
Oh my goodness.
so that's been a real trend in the last few years, and I know at least three of them. And one of them, she's like, "That's not a Vardo, because it's not a that style of wagon,
Right.
but it's like a little medieval house, and it's super cool." And she's painted the inside like a painted ceiling in a cathedral. It's
Oh,
really
that's
cool.
so cool.
And then I know of at least two other people with the Vardos, and that's super cool. And then people with their tents and beds and chairs and really cool stuff. And it's just
So
so fun.
excited.
Yeah.
I'll unfortunately have to start with the modern stuff, but we'll get
I never
there.
progressed beyond the modern stuff because the problem is my husband has a bad back, and
Mm.
so even when we camp, we stick up a tent on site to put our stuff in, and then we go stay in a hotel because he can't sleep overnight in a tent.
Eh,
But when I go by myself, on the other hand, I have in general always camped, and I never really progressed beyond having a modern tent.
I like
Although I
the
have some
idea of sheepskin.
standards and chairs and things like that, but the tent has always been modern.
Yeah. What are you looking forward to after lockdown and everything sort of settles?
Just, I think when you've been in the SCA for 30 years, you get used to a certain rhythm of events and seeing people and going out and doing the things you love to do around other people, like shooting archery or just showing up and watching people fight or talking about arts and doing it in person. I mean, we've had
Hmm.
tons and tons of opportunities over all of this to have classes and things like that, which has been great, but seeing it in person and getting to fondle the fabric, or actually sit there and paint together or just talk together, it's really nice.
It
And
sounds nice.
I think that's what I miss the most, is just getting out and being around people. And it's not that I necessarily spent huge, massive amounts of time hugging people or anything like that, but it was being around people. And the people in the SCA are so creative. There's so many talented people, and just being around people who are engaged in doing neat things and seeing the things that they do whether it's martial activities or, calligraphy and illumination or pottery or clothing or all those sorts of things. And seeing them live in person, it really does make a difference. And I miss it. It's, I do things like this, which is fun, but I am looking forward to having events again where we can have people.
Can't wait to see you in person again.
Yeah. And I'm like when it's been such an important part of your life, it feels weird right now because so many of my Saturdays were for the SCA, and now I look at a Saturday like right now, like what the hell am I doing today? I have no idea. Let's go out and drive or something,
I can't wait to get to that point. Like the SCA just seems right for me, and it's so exciting to be able to find something where you're that strange looking puzzle piece and you finally found a hole you fit in.
Yeah. And the nice thing about it is there's so many different things you can do in the SCA that you're going to find that fit somewhere.
Yeah. I somehow became the C-Blat Suivante.
I've noticed that.
A short time.
So I'm a past Trillium Herald. I'm also a Herald Extraordinary. I love heraldry.
It's so cool.
And I'll have to suck you into the current heraldic silliness that I do, which is the College of Heralds Imaginary, which every April 1st we come up with a letter of heraldic registrations that are all joke names.
Oh, right! I've seen one of those! And I would happily draw, like, custom pieces for you guys.
Woohoo! That's awesome. So yeah. I started doing that when I was Submissions Herald for Ealdormere. When I turned that over to Ryland and then eventually Dietrich, I continued to do it. And last year, I got suckered into doing that job at the society level. We have a society level. I get to be the tyrant. I love that. Instead of, for the king of arms or the queen at arms or sovereign at arms, I'm the tyrant at arms, and it's awesome. And that's all we do is we come up with silly April 1st letters of intent. And
that's a great job.
I get sucked in on that. It's a lot of fun.
Well, I think this was awesome talking to you.
I agree. And one of the things I think I've learned in 30 years in the SCA is that new people coming in is what keeps us alive. And your enthusiasm turns over onto my enthusiasm, and hearing somebody new and enthusiastic and just discovering all the cool things you can do in the SCA is super inspiring to somebody who's been around for a very long time. And people ask me that, why do you stay around? And it's that, because
new people bouncing around and excited.
I love to learn. I'm like the shark. If I don't keep swimming, I die. And it's like that with learning things. And there's always something new to learn in the SCA, something new to do, new people coming in, new ideas, people who come in who decide to make their own helmet in the first 5 months, which is awesome.
That thing's solid.
Yeah.
You know the reason I actually made that thing? I looked at other helmets and was like, that's too expensive, I'm too cheap. Managed to find a big sheet of steel for like $10 and was like, that's a helmet in the making.
If you can do it, that's awesome. And that's how the SCA keeps going, is because people keep bringing in those skills, and you discover things along the way that you really like doing. And even if you did it because it would have been too expensive to do it the other way, it all works, and you learn and you do stuff, and it's fun.
It's always fun. It's always fun to make things.
I agree. And I think if there's one thing I kind of miss with all the lockdown stuff, is having a reason to make things.
Yeah.
I love a deadline, and I love having a purpose to make something like a scroll, because I know that's going to be given to someone at a certain date, and I better have it done by that time, or else it would be bad. And or having to know, an event is coming up, so I need to have a thing, a piece of clothing done by then, and having that deadline. And it's like right now, it's like, yeah, I can sit around and make things. I finally decided I needed to get off my butt and make arrows, because the archery range at the Ontario Science Centre in Toronto is open, and it's a bit of a drive for me, but I was pining for archery, and it's like, okay, I think it's time to make some arrows. So it's the first time I felt like I better get something done by a certain time, because my old arrows are a bit loopy. So
just they're a little bit strange. Won't
they're
fly
old.
straight.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's it. Arrows, when they're shot, they lose their, every time you shoot them, they lose a little of their springiness, because you're putting force into it. It's wood, and it's like wood. When you continue pushing on a piece of wood that's springy, gradually it will get less springy. Well, they turn into what archers call noodles. So if you're to the point where your arrows are getting a bit bent and droopy, and when you shoot them, they kind of go, we call them shooting noodles, and it's time to retire them at that point. And I've got
the visual of a hand cannon with like ramen coming out comes to mind.
That's not a wrong look, when you get to them to the point they just they've lost their ability to fly correctly. They just
they're not that safe anymore either.
They're just squishy. They're just, they don't do what you want them to do. You aim them and they don't go where you're aiming them, and it's no fun.
Time to retire. Stick them in the ground and be like, okay, you can be a stick again.
Yeah, pretty much. You break them and you smell the cedar. Oh God, that smells good. So yeah.
Glad I'm not the only one who just sits there and is like, wood, yes.
Yeah. And cedar in particular, cedar arrows, that's the only downside of breaking an arrow. You get to sniff the cedar. And it smells good.
Always a silver lining.
Yep. Do you have a question for me about, if there's anything you'd ask me as an experienced person, what would you ask me?
I don't know, really. It's that ultimate question of, like I have so many questions of, how does one become an apprentice or a pelican, but I've had those answered recently for me. So, I don't know.
Maybe we'll just take a rain check on that, and feel free to ask me at any time. And that goes for anyone watching. I mean, those of us who have been around for a long time are willing to talk your ear off, and you might regret asking us.
I did discover I have not regretted it yet, but I do run out of questions eventually, which shocked me. I was like, I didn't think I could run out of questions, but you proved me wrong, so.
There we go. So, yeah, many of us are, and I think most of us are super willing to talk about things, and especially when it's things we're passionate about. And I think that'll be your main problem, is getting us to shut up.
I don't think this will be a problem. It's like having too many kittens. I don't think it's much of a problem.
I agree. There's no such thing as too many kittens.
Talking about kittens, I better let my baby boy in.
Yeah. Well, I have arrows to finish. I want to be able to shoot them soon, so maybe we should wrap this up. It was super fun talking to you, and super fun finding out that you're named after the same person I am.
I love that, though. But yes, it was great talking with you as well.
Okay. So I guess hopefully Ealdormere has enjoyed peeking in on all of this fun too, and you've gotten something out of it. And so I guess we'll say goodbye to everyone from that standpoint, and talk to you soon.